O Pioneers, Part 5, Alexandra, Chapter 1, Part 2 of Chapter 1. When they got home, Signa had a fire burning in the sitting-room stove. She undressed Alexandra and gave her a hot foot-bath, while Ivar made ginger tea in the kitchen. When Alexandra was in bed, wrapped in hot blankets, Ivar came in with his tea and saw that she drank it. Signa asked permission to sleep on the slat lounge outside her door. Alexandra endured their attentions patiently, but she was glad when they put out the lamp and left her. As she lay alone in the dark, it occurred to her for the first time that perhaps she was actually tired of life. All the physical operations of life seemed difficult and painful. She longed to be free from her own body, which ached and was so heavy, and longing itself was heavy. She yearned to be free of that. As she lay with her eyes closed, she had again, more vividly than for many years, the old illusion of her girlhood, of being lifted and carried lightly by someone very strong. He was with her a long while this time, and carried her very far, and in his arms she felt free from pain. When he laid her down on her bed again, she opened her eyes, and for the first time in her life she saw him clearly, though the room was dark and his face was covered. He was standing in the doorway of her room. His white cloak was thrown over his face, and his head was bent a little forward. His shoulders seemed as strong as the foundations of the world. His right arm, bared from the elbow, was dark and gleaming, like bronze, and she knew at once that it was the arm of the mightiest of all lovers. She knew at last for whom it was she had waited, and where he would carry her. That, she told herself, was very well. Then she slept. Alexandra wakened in the morning with nothing worse than a hard cold and a stiff shoulder. She kept her bed for several days, and it was during that time that she formed a resolution to go to Lincoln and to see Frank Shibata. Ever since she had last saw him in the courtroom, Frank's haggard face and wild eyes had haunted her. The trial had lasted only 3 days. Frank had given himself up to the police in Omaha and had pleaded guilty of killing without malice and without premeditation. The gun was, of course, against him, and the judge had given him the full sentence, 10 years. He had now been in the state penitentiary for a month. Frank was the only one, Alexandra told herself, for whom anything could be done. He had been less in the wrong than any of them, and he was paying the heaviest penalty. She often felt that she herself had been more to blame than poor Frank. From the time the Shibatas had first moved to the neighboring farm, she had admitted no opportunity of throwing Marie and Emile together. Excuse me. Because she knew Frank was surly about doing little things to help his wife, she was always sending Emile over to spade or plant or carpenter for Marie. She was glad to have Emile see as much as possible of an intelligent, city-bred girl like their neighbor. She noticed that it improved his manners. She knew that Emile was fond of Marie, but it had never occurred to her that Emile's feeling might be different from her own. She wondered at herself now, but she had never thought of danger in that direction. If Marie had been unmarried, oh yes, then she would have kept her eyes open, but the mere fact that she was Shibata's wife, for Alexandra, settled everything. That she was beautiful, impulsive, barely 2 years older than Emile, these facts had no weight with Alexandra. Emile was a good boy, and only bad boys ran after married women. Now Alexandra could in a measure realize that Marie was, after all, Marie, not merely a married woman. Sometimes when Alexandra thought of her, it was with an aching tenderness. The moment she had reached them in the orchard that morning, everything was clear to her. There was something about those two lying in the grass, something in the way Marie had settled her cheek on Emile's shoulder, that told her everything. She wondered then how they could have helped loving each other, how she could have helped knowing that they must. Emile's cold, frowning face, the girl's content. Alexandra had felt awe of them, even in the first shock of her grief. The idleness of those days in bed, the relaxation of body which attended them, enabled Alexandra to think more calmly than she had done since Emile's death. She and Frank, told herself, were left out of that group of friends who had been overwhelmed by disaster. She must certainly see Frank Shibata. Even in the courtroom her heart had grieved for him. He was in a strange country. He had no kinsmen nor friends, and in a moment he had ruined his life. Being what he was, she felt, Frank could not have acted otherwise. She could understand his behavior more easily than she could understand Marie's. Yes, she must go to Lincoln to see Frank Shabata. The day after Emil's funeral, Alexandra had written to Carl Lindstrom, a single page of notepaper, a bare statement of what had happened. She was not a woman who could write much about such a thing, and about her own feelings she could never write very freely. She knew that Carl was away from post offices, prospecting somewhere in the interior. Before he started, he had written her where he expected to go, but her ideas about Alaska were vague. As the weeks went by and she heard nothing from him, it seemed to Alexandra that her heart grew hard against Carl. She began to wonder whether she would not do better to finish her life alone. What was left of life seemed unimportant.